Fox News Alert: President Trump scoring a big legal victory today. The Supreme Court key parts of his travel ban. The decision allows the administration to temporarily block citizens of 6 mostly Muslim nations from the United States and overturns a lower court's decision striking down the order. But with that ruling comes with one exception. Those with a blood or legal relation to someone in the United States will be allowed into the country. Doug McKelway is following this closely for us live outside of the Supreme Court. Doug?
And, Megan, this amounts to a powerful slapdown of those opinions issued by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, and also the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals out west. The court has agreed to hear oral arguments on the travel ban in its next session beginning in October. But in the meantime, it is allowing the travel ban to take effect. This is a huge victory for the Trump administration. Reading now from the opinion, it says, we now turn to the preliminary injunctions barring enforcement of the 2C entry suspension. We grant the government's applications to stay the injunctions to the extent that the injunctions prevent enforcement of 2C with respect to foreign nationals who lack any bona fide relationship with a person or entity in the United States. And that gets to the point that you just made, that people who have blood relatives here will be accepted. And we're talking about people from the countries of Sudan, Yemen, Iran, Syria, Libya, and Somalia. This is, as I said, a big victory for the Trump administration. Here's longtime Supreme Court observer Tim O'Brien.
A huge victory for the White House. Yes, indeed. There's no other way of looking at this. In fact, I see this opinion here lifting the stay, allowing the ban to go forward against most of those against whom it was to be applied as a blueprint for a decision later this year.
And in a recent filing, the Department of Justice asked the court to allow this ban to take effect 120 days from its onset. And they said they prefer to wait for all the court opinions to be over and done with. So that point of onset begins basically right now. The administration has said 72 hours to impose it. But that 120 days begins after that 72 hours. And in another very, very important decision today, a big victory for religious liberty in this country. It comes in the case of Trinity Lutheran Church versus the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. This involved a grant that the Department of Natural Resources was issuing to nonprofits across the state of Missouri. The Trinity Lutheran Church asked for one of these grants to resurface their playground, which was slightly dangerous. It was made of pebbles and or gravel. They asked for this grant. They were denied the grant by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources on the grounds that they were a religious institution. The Supreme Court today sided with the Missouri school, the Trinity Lutheran Church and school. In their opinion, they said, quote, but the exclusion of Trinity Lutheran from a public benefit for which it is otherwise qualified solely because it is a church is odious to our Constitution all the same and cannot stand. An important victory for the religious liberty, not only at that particular school, but this has wide-ranging repercussions in perhaps as many as 29 other states, which bar direct involvement by the state in funding for any religious institution. I'll have much more on this as the day progresses. Megan, back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Doug.
Yeah.
This is Outnumbered. I'm Megan McCain here today. Kennedy, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, Abby Huntsman, the anchor of the Intelligence Report on Fox Business, Trish Regan, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, the former Secretary of Education under President Ronald Reagan, Bill Bennett. He chairs the Conservative Leaders for Education and hosts the Bill Bennett podcast. Welcome back, and you're outnumbered.
Thank you, Megan. Glad to be.
Yes, it's a crazy news day. It's nice to have you back on the couch.
News day, a lot to talk about.
All right, so let's get started with the travel ban, obviously what Doug was just talking about. Are you surprised this ended up passing by the courts, and what do you think this means going forward?
I'm not surprised. I think it's pretty clear constitutionally what the president's authority is here, which is pretty much exclusive. Isn't it interesting, though, when the Supreme Court speaks, no matter what you think of the Supreme Court, it has a loud and distinct voice. You stop and you listen to see what it is they have to say. I think this suggests that the lower courts were outliers here and mavericks, and this is a big victory for Donald Trump and the White House. Remember what a big part of the campaign this issue was and how shocked and horrified a lot of people were. Now here's the Supreme Court, which is, to say the least, a divided court, nevertheless saying that his ruling can stand.
You know, Abby, they were caught up on the word ban during the election and then after this, and I'm hearing this called a travel ban again, so I guess that didn't end up mattering.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the respect of the Supreme Court, because you're right, when they make a decision, you still sit back and you say, okay, that's going to be the law of the land until that, they're going to look at it again maybe in October. But there are for sure, whatever the language is, Megan, a bunch of high fives going on at the White House today. This is a win for them, but also a win for the Trump supporters, many of them that voted for President Trump, wanting more security in this country. I mean, you think about what's going on in Europe, what's happened most recently in the UK, 4 terror attacks in 3 months. And I think there are a lot of people here at home looking at that saying, we have got to pay more attention to this. We don't want that to happen here at home. I think there are a lot of people, not just the White House, but a lot of Americans pretty happy about that decision today as well.
Kennedy, do you think the blood relatives aspect of this is going to get anybody angry?
Absolutely. I think people who are looking for the ban to solidify security in this country only have to look at what happened in San Bernardino. Because as you remember, the shooter, the main perpetrator in San Bernardino, he was an American citizen who brought his wife from overseas. And, if there are such marriages or relationships where someone is abroad waiting for their relationship to be legally justified, then, who knows who we're bringing into the country. But as I've said before, I think it gives us a false sense of security because so many Western European countries that are our true allies are harboring terrorists. And we've talked about the number 27 or 23,000 alone in Great Britain. That's what their government says. That's the number they're dealing with. That many terrorists possibly just percolating in the UK. So are we going to have a travel ban in the UK? And a lot of those people were born in that country as well.
I want to get Trish in on this. I mean, Kennedy and I spoke about last week the London terrorist or the British terrorist. He actually went on the BBC and held up a sign that said was supporting ISIS, and he still wasn't caught or flagged or taken in. So do you think this ban gives us a false sense of security?
It gives us hopefully a little bit more security, but I would agree you've got to do something about spouses, about parents. People should not be given carte blanche to come here just because they are related to someone who is here. They should be subjected to the same kind of scrutiny anybody else would. But I think it does something in that we're not just welcoming everyone with open arms. I think we do need to have standards, and this gets us partly there. I think the other advantage of the Supreme Court weighing in on this is it strips out some of the politics of this. Don't forget, this had become a political hot-button issue, and I always wondered, look, if the President of the United States is privy to information that would provide us with more security as a country, why is it that some judge off in Washington or the Ninth Circuit can somehow weigh in and say, no, I disagree? There has to be some sense that our president is going to do what's best for security purposes.
Yeah, I would just say this, good comments on both sides, but I agree with Kennedy. It doesn't give a complete sense of security or a false sense of security, but it does add something, I think. And remember, the responsibility of the chief executive, his first and major, is the safety and security of citizens. This also doesn't obviate or eliminate the extreme vetting. So to the question of spouses and relations and others, you can have extreme vetting. We are not Europe, and I think the world understands that we are not Europe. We don't have the kind of permissive policies they have, and we're not having the kind of trouble they have. This sends a signal as well as a policy, and I think it's very good. Most interesting thing to me will be to see what people who were so critical of the president when he said this are going to react to a court decision. We don't know what the numbers are because we don't have an opinion.
Yeah, because the initial rollout was so tumultuous.
Right, because supposing it's a 6-3 or 7-2 decision, my gosh, people are going to have to.
But that'll be really interesting, and
Yes,
I know we're going to talk about this later in the show, but how does this ruling influence whether or not Justice Kennedy retires? And how does he weigh that? Because it
I
seems
thought it was
like
you who was retiring, Kennedy. They said
no.
Kennedy's coming.
But what we can see here is these more liberal federal judiciaries weighing in and slapping the president down, and then having it go up to the Supreme Court, which now arguably could be much more conservative if in fact Justice Kennedy retires and the Senate is able to confirm someone who isn't a swing vote, who looks like they're going to be a longer term conservative.
And just quickly, Megan, it also shows that what was said on the campaign trail from President Trump at the time, the court obviously said that's not how we're looking at this. We are looking at it in the present time, exactly what that law says, because there was a lot of politics, as you said, around the language of it, and clearly they didn't see it that way.
Yeah, and we're going to stay on this, keeping updated. Meantime, big developments in the Senate on health care. The latest move by Republican leader Mitch McConnell to try to get a bill across the finish line. This week, will it be enough? Plus, the full court press coming out of the White House, President Trump's personal efforts to get some wavering Republicans behind the bill, and whether they'll prove effective.
Welcome back to Outnumbered. Well, new developments in what could be a potential make or break week for health care. A Senate aide now confirms to Fox News that a revised draft of the Senate GOP bill is expected to be released today in a bid to win over some wavering Republicans. And this, as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he wants a vote on the GOP's version to replace Obamacare before lawmakers break for the July 4th recess. And Republicans cannot afford to lose more than 2 votes to pass that bill. Right now, 5 GOP senators say they cannot support it, with more saying they'll decide once they see how the Congressional Budget Office scores that bill. That could happen as early as today. Well, President Trump says he's optimistic.
I made a lot of great friendships with the people in the House, a lot of them. Same thing in the Senate. They're 4 very good people. They're friends of mine. And I don't think they're that far off. I don't think they're that far off. You know, famous last words, right? But I think we're going to get there. Can't promise. I think we're going to get there.
Some optimism there, but Louisiana Republican Bill Cassidy saying if changes are not made, he is not on board.
Right now, I am undecided. There are things in this bill which adversely affect my state that are peculiar to my state. A couple of the things I'm concerned about. But if those can be addressed, I will. And if they can't be addressed, I won't.
Meantime, with no Democrats supporting this bill, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer on the odds of Republicans pulling this thing off.
I think it's 50-50. First, Democrats, we are doing everything we can to fight this bill because it's so devastating for the middle class. I think they have, at best, a 50-50 chance of passing this bill.
All right, let's bring it to the couch. So obviously you're not going to get probably 1 Democratic vote. Now it is between the Republicans. 5 are saying no. Bill, where do you think this goes? Because you need 2 right out of these 5. How do they come together? Because you have many of them saying, I can't pass this unless you give me something that I want.
Well, in the real world, you can't see an easy way for them to get together. But there is this magician named McConnell. I mean, he is very good at this stuff in terms of doing this kind of legislative work. There's no one his equal. I still have my doubts. And I also, I'm a little different on this one. I think the Republicans needed to make a really good try on this. Very important. But I'm not sure they want this win, particularly with this kind of legislation. I can't fathom all the details of this. I know very few people who can. Secretary Price is one of them, but there are very few others. But I'm not sure they want all the headaches that come with this and all the complaints, the 10 million interviews that we will see about people who are having difficulty. I wish we could move on to tax reform quickly. I understand the connection between the two, but this is a very mixed blessing at best.
Because, Megan, obviously you want a good deal at the end of this. It's better to take your time to get it right.
That's
There
right.
are the concerns from these 5 Republican senators that this doesn't lower premiums enough. This does not give enough flexibility to the states. Are they right to be so concerned?
I already bought my hors d'oeuvres for the 4th of July at Costco this weekend. The idea that this is going to get done by the time I'm eating them is ridiculous. I don't think the 4th of July deadline is going to happen at all. I actually want to go to you, Kennedy. What are the odds you're going to get somebody like Ben Sasse and Ron Paul on the same page with this? 2 very different factions of the Republican Party. Somebody's going to hedge one way or the other. Do you think it's possible?
It's really interesting because if there's too much hedging one way or the other, this thing is dead on arrival in the House. So there's such a tightrope act right now between the 2 factions who seem to be growing further and further apart. And, you know, it makes you wonder, is there a Republican Party right now? Because the ideological purists, the constitutionalists that we have talked about so many times on this couch, they're kind of dug in. They have great negotiating power, but they also don't want to see decades of socialized medicine in this country. Look what's happened with Obamacare in just a few years. What could happen with more socialized medicine over 30 years? And how is that going to limit economic growth? Ben Sasse, interestingly, he's staying mum on the whole thing. He's not saying whether or not he's going to vote for or against the legislation, but a lot of them are saying they want to get to yes. That is politically expedient for them to say, but that means there have to be the kind of concessions that could kill it with moderates in the House.
Right, so wanting to get to yes, I mean, I have been told this is called kabuki theater, that they're maybe just saying this to appease their base, and ultimately they will get to yes, but they want to show that they're ideologically sound. Ted Cruz would be someone I would assume would be in that camp. Do you think they'll end up hedging?
I'm with you. I don't think you're going to be seeing any kind of health care bill by the time you're eating those hors d'oeuvres on the 4th of July. I think this is a very hard thing to undertake. I'm disappointed, however, because I think that there are real economic reasons to do this. Getting rid of the individual mandate, getting rid of the mandate for businesses is critical. It's critical for small business owners. And there's a boost that you would see economically to our country if you were able to do that. I don't think they can. I don't think they'll get there. And it is a big disappointment because you know what this does? It delays important things, very important things like tax reform, as Bill just mentioned.
Yeah,
and that's
but is it a bigger disappointment than to get it and to live with the consequences of it? One advantage of not getting it is the Democrats still own it. And then you may get these reforms later on. I mean, people hypothesize about 20 million people losing Medicaid and so on. We know what's happening under the current system.
That's right.
With the Obama system. Maybe the Democrats should own it. I think I'm quoting the president, who said, remember, he had a thought on, he put to the microphone and said, maybe this thing should just continue to be the Democrats' property and let them live.
Yeah, they're loving every minute of
let
this.
it fail, and then it goes, it can't go into a single payer system, but people realize too much government involvement tanks the whole thing, including.
But there are bad consequences, as Trish said. No kidding.
All right. Now, meantime, President Trump working the phones, trying to build support among Republican senators for the health care bill, and he's not the only one turning up the heat on members of his own party. A pro-Trump group launching a $1 million ad campaign attacking Nevada Senator Dean Heller, the 5th Republican to come out against the bill. Politico characterizing it as a warning to other GOP senators to get in line. The president today tweeting, quote, Republican senators are working very hard to get there with no help from the Democrats. Not easy. Perhaps just let Obamacare crash and burn. Which, Secretary Bennett, that goes to your point exactly. So will this sort of outside pressure be the coalescing force for Republicans who are straying toward the no side?
I don't think there's enough there. Just one other point, because you're right about where's the Republican Party. This is a consequence of being a majority party. You end up having these factions, and you've got moderates, you've got people some of us would call liberals, and you've got real conservatives. This is the problem with being the big party, and they cannot get it together. I think they're going to have problems. I want to say maybe I agree with Chuck Schumer for the first time this year, 50-50, maybe 51-49.
But this is exactly, Megan, what Democrats are wanting, as you're saying, Bill, as well, to say, you know what, we've wanted Republicans to crash and burn on health care. We want them to see how complicated this is because we've been the one on defense for the past 8 years, and now they're watching what a struggle this has been for Republicans. So even if you're a Democrat and you know changes need to be made, which many of them have admitted needs to happen, I think they are together
on that.
You're right, they campaign on that, but now I think they're all together saying, let this crash and burn. This looks better for us.
If you say let this crash and burn, let these people suffer, let Arizonans keep paying over 100% in their premiums, that's a bad message going into midterms. I will say, going to you, Trish, I need someone to explain to me, and Mitch McConnell, I've been told, is a magician, as you just said, how he's going to get Lisa Murkowski and Mike Lee on the same page.
I don't think he can. I mean, I'd like to hear what kind of magic trick he's going to pull out of his sleeve there, because I think, for Murkowski, she's going to look at this and say, look, you're putting too many people off of Medicaid, and these are my constituents, and I need to do what's right for me and for them in the here and now, and forget, how this is going to affect the future, or maybe there's an economic benefit here to businesses, which will employ more people and therefore get more people on health care. She's not thinking that far ahead. She's just thinking about those people that are sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm no longer going to be on Medicaid as a result of what just happened.
But I want to ask you about this, because that brings up a really good point that the bill doesn't fully address, and that is the idea of block granting money, Medicaid money to states, because obviously states like Alaska and Maine have vastly different needs for Medicaid than other states, and they should be allowed to decide. Does the bill fully address that?
I don't think it fully addresses it, but it certainly goes in that direction. When I was Secretary of Education, we asked the people who received our funds to evaluate our programs. Number one vote getter was the block grant.
Yeah.
We take your money and then we give it back to you. Of course, we take 15% out for government, but it goes back to you. No, the situations in the states are so different that states should be given their head on this. But the reason, with all due respect, that you don't know how he can do it is you're not magicians.
I'm not magicians.
You're not Mitch McConnell.
So you believe he can do it,
I believe the reason I say it's 51-49 against us because of McConnell. I think he's just so good at it. And I agree with all of you about the consequences, terrible consequences if nothing passes.
We had
But there are terrible consequences either way. This was the problem. Remember Ted Cruz said, if once we get this thing, we're going to be living with it as a nightmare forever.
And he was right.
He was right. He was right.
It was Cassandra. All right, another top Democrat apparently ill over claims that former Attorney General Loretta Lynch wanted to soften the tone of the Hillary Clinton email probe ahead how lawmakers are now digging deeper into those allegations. More from the couch in moments.
Fox News alert President Trump hailing the Supreme Court's decision on his temporary travel ban, affirming for now key parts of his executive order. Mr. Trump saying in part, quote, today's unanimous Supreme Court decision is a clear victory for our national security. It allows the travel suspension for the 6 terror-prone countries and the refugee suspension to become largely effective. As president, I cannot allow people into our country who want to do us harm. Meantime, it's not just James Comey saying he felt queasy about former Attorney General Loretta Lynch ordering him to not refer to the probe into Hillary Clinton's emails as an investigation. Another prominent Democrat appears to agree with him, California Congressman Adam Schiff.
It does give me a queasy feeling as well. There may be a perfectly accurate explanation by Loretta Lynch about why she thought matter was the appropriate term rather than investigation, so I wouldn't assume James Comey's characterization is the last word on it, even though I'm sure it's accurate. But I'd like to hear what Loretta Lynch's explanation for that is.
Congressman Schiff appearing to side with Senator Dianne Feinstein, who also said she felt, quote, queasy over the thought of Clinton's email investigation that may have been politicized by Lynch. Schiff's remarks come as the Senate Judicial Committee, on which Feinstein is the ranking Democrat, has launched an investigation into whether Lynch tried to bury the Clinton probe. So is queasy I don't know what they're both saying the word queasy. What do you think that means?
I think it's the more gentle version of what they'd say about Donald Trump. But it's a weird day for me. I not only agree with Schumer on 50-50, I agree with Schiff.
Some pigs flying around the studio.
That's right, and Dianne Feinstein. No, this is bad business. And it was amazing, wasn't it? Didn't you think it was amazing when Comey threw that out in his testimony? It was almost unnecessary. Just threw it out just to sort of get his revenge. This guy really gets it in for people. But no, there should be an investigation. That's a very serious one.
And it was very deliberate, by the way. What he did, how he said it, what exactly he said, because as you remember, in some of his testimony, he alluded to the fact that there was more, that, you know, there were more conversations and more evidence that perhaps the former Attorney General was meddling in the election in ways that certainly you wouldn't like to see the head of our Justice Department doing. So, you know, the fact that he said that and the fact that so many Democrats are piling on to Loretta Lynch, that should really show you something, because they're trying to at least appear balanced in their hunt for Donald Trump and this elusive collusion. They're constantly.
Yeah, don't you think it also shows a little loss of confidence in their main agenda item here? That is trying to
the Russia collusion.
Yeah, the Russia collusion.
I do think it is refreshing, as you said, Kennedy, to see the members of their own party saying, this looks fishy. We need to take a deeper look into this. But also, why so late in the game? We've been talking about this Russia collusion story for months and months now, and there's still no there. We'll see where it all goes. But when you think about Loretta Lynch and the things that went on during that Hillary Clinton scandal and the investigation that was going on, the fact they met on the tarmac, they just talked about their grandkids and golf, how there weren't more questions at the time and there wasn't an investigation launched back then.
And there wasn't
that was all going on
by either one of them.
Right. I mean, a lot of questions still remain.
Trish, I mean, Ted Cruz says that everything Loretta Lynch, she's Typhoid Mary, everything she does gets infected. Do you think it's possible the Democrats are finally turning on her?
I think that they're realizing they can't continue this narrative, that it's not working. They've been talking about this for, what, a year? I mean, before President Trump was even elected, they were talking about the collusion issue in Russia and whether or not there were ties. And none of that has panned out. But what has seemed to surface is that Loretta Lynch, and all those suspicions were completely, by the way, justified way back when she was having the meeting with the plane and Bill Clinton. A lot more questions from the Democratic Party should have been asked then. They were being asked by some Republicans, but of course they're not going to do that. They're not going to sacrifice themselves in that way. I think now they're realizing for their own credibility, they have no choice. But this looks suspicious.
Do you think they weren't asking because they thought Hillary Clinton would win? And our president asked the same question in this tweet. President Trump said, we have the tweet coming up, the reason that President Obama did nothing about Russia after being notified by the CIA of meddling is that he expected Clinton would win and did not want to rock the boat. He didn't choke, he colluded or obstructed, and it did the Dems and crooked Hillary no good.
Yeah, he probably figured there was no possible way Donald Trump could ever win this thing, so it didn't matter how much collusion was there by the Russians, whether it existed or not. Hillary Clinton was still going to be president. And don't forget, when it comes to Russia and Hillary Clinton, I actually think there's a decent amount of there in terms of the uranium deal, in terms of her being Secretary of State, in terms of them buying access through the Clinton Foundation. So he may not have, in some ways, wanted to open that box.
But you know what? You do what's right. And Bill, you know this. When you're commander-in-chief, you do what's right for the American people, not just for your political party. So former President Barack Obama knew about Russia meddling back in, August, before the election even happened. You do the right thing, and you do something about that then, regardless of who is expected to win. That didn't happen with him.
And regardless of your ideological preconceptions.
Right.
Remember Mitt Romney in the third debate? What's the greatest geopolitical threat in the world? Russia. And he was laughed off the stage by a lot of Democrats, and Barack Obama just dismissed it. Then this thing falls into Barack Obama's lap, and he does nothing about it. That was a Washington Post blockbuster story that needs more attention rather than less attention.
I'm wondering, by the way, just to go back to Comey and Loretta Lynch, I'm wondering if, in bringing her up in his testimony, if that was a signal, please subpoena the rest of my memoranda. Because he was talking about, the explicit way he documented the conversation that he had with the president. And, you're wondering, well, did he use this same methodology in other important conversations that he had? So when he debriefed the Attorney General about the meeting she had on the tarmac with the former president, does he have the same kind of documentation, and was he signaling, the future special counsel or the congressional committees to reach into his cookie jar and pull out some goodies?
But how much of this is a possible pipe dream? The Clintons slither out of everything. I don't know if I'll ever really understand what happened.
They do when they have power to sell, but they are politically useless now.
They don't think so, Kennedy.
Yeah.
They still think they're the leaders of the Democratic movement.
Too bad.
Yeah.
I just don't know if ultimately sometimes I think this is all a pipe dream, that we're ever going to really know what happened on that tarmac, what you said with the uranium deal, know what happened with the Clinton Foundation, if they're just going to continue.
And there's
been
no media coverage. I mean, we followed this over the weekend on Fox and Friends about the Attorney General Loretta Lynch. There was basically zero coverage on the networks of that investigation happening. You compare that to their coverage of the Russia collusion. Still, it's night and day. So to your point, I don't think people are going to be focused on that nearly as much, Megan.
Is there still a Clinton Foundation? When was the last $5 million grant?
I don't think it exists anymore, but they're certainly still tweeting.
Right,
anyway.
don't tell them that they're not in charge anymore. Don't tell them. Tell Nancy she's in charge and should stay in charge.
Okay, we got to move on. President Trump slamming Democrats over their resist strategy, calling them obstructionists, but Democrats doubling down on their opposition to the president's agenda despite recent election losses. Two party leaders need to change course ahead of the midterms. We debate next.
President Trump, in an interview with Fox and Friends Weekend, slamming Democrats over their resist strategy, saying it's bad for Americans. Watch him here.
It's obstruction. And the problem is they become obstructionists, and the voters, I happen to like it from the standpoint of running for office, but I think it's a terrible theme in terms of getting elected. And more importantly, I think it's a terrible theme for the people of this country. Resist, obstruction. That's not what they want.
Meanwhile, The Hill reports Republicans plan to use House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi against Democrats in next year's midterms. Quote, Republicans have found that attacks on Pelosi pay electoral dividends, arguing that any Democratic candidate, no matter how moderate, will ultimately